Joining me today is Dr. Nick Maynard, or simply Nick, as he humbly insists he be called. Nick Maynard is a consultant gastrointestinal and cancer surgeon at Oxford University Hospitals and an associate professor of surgery at the University of Oxford. For more than a decade, he has worked extensively in Gaza, training Palestinian doctors, treating patients, and witnessing firsthand the realities of life inside the territory, both before and during the current war, which now is in a ceasefire phase. So, Nick, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you.
It's been a long time coming, as we were just discussing.
Well, I'm glad you persisted in trying to get hold of me. So, yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. So let's get into it. Just a month ago, you sat down with Tucker Carlson, in what many viewers described as one of the most revealing conversations they've heard on Gaza. While much of what you shared wasn't particularly surprising to many of us here in the Eastern Mediterranean, it was clearly eye-opening for millions of Western viewers who had never before heard these realities described, much less by an Oxford surgeon who had spent years on the ground there. So rather than starting from scratch, I'd like to think of today's conversation as picking up from where that interview left off and exploring some of those issues through other angles, maybe, and in greater depth if we can. So let me begin here. Here in the Eastern Mediterranean, Nick, long before October 7th, many people viewed Gaza as a pressure cooker waiting to explode, yet most Westerners only became aware of Gaza after October 7th. Before 2023, Gaza was frequently, though, described by journalists and aid workers as the world's largest open-air prison. Today, many describe it as the world's largest concentration camp. So having spent more than a decade working there, do you believe that October 7th was the beginning of this story or the consequence of a reality that had already existed for decades?
Very much the latter. We were all appalled by what happened on October the 7th, but it certainly did not start on October the 7th. And it's impossible to really talk about those events on October the 7th and what's happened subsequently without understanding the context, the history behind all of this. As you say, I've been going to Gaza for nearly 17 years now. In 2010 was my first trip. And it is, as you say, called an open-air prison or concentration camp. And people may take issue with that terminology, but what lies behind those descriptions is the undeniable fact that greatly more than 99% of the population of Gaza have never been able to leave their country. They have been imprisoned there. It's been occupied by Israel for well over 10 years now. It's been blockaded. It's been occupied for 20 years, blockaded for 10 years. And however awful the events were on October the 7th, the resistance in Gaza has been escalating because they have been an occupied country.
Yes. Do you mind saying in brief, how was that occupation exercised during those decades? I mean, there was a restriction in the movement of people, of goods, of control of airspace, and of water also, of the sea.
So people who deny, the Israeli propaganda, which is supported by Western media, by our government, who claim that, the Israelis left Gaza in 2005, how can they be occupying it? It's been a prison. They have controlled the borders. They have the ability of Gazans to leave Gaza has been entirely under the control of the Israelis. And yes, some people are allowed to go out and have been allowed to go out and work in Israel. But the vast majority, well over 90%, have been imprisoned there. And you only have to see what it was like going into Gaza before October the 7th to understand what I mean. And I've been going there since 2010. To get into Gaza, you have to get permits from the Israeli government. They take often months to process. Going through the Erez crossing, which is the northern part of Gaza, the border with Israel, in the early years, it used to take us all day to get through. The most intense security, very aggressive questioning by the Israeli soldiers at the border. We used to walk, having got through that, you'd then walk across the sort of the no man's land, and you'd look back and there'd be watchtowers with Israeli snipers in there with guns trained on us. So the security was unbelievable. They controlled absolutely everything that went in. They controlled and, in fact, largely disabled the whole Gazan economy. Um, and of course they kept all the resources very, very limited. I went in there to work as a doctor for many years, so I'm very familiar with the resources going in for healthcare, and they were very limited. So the Israelis controlled and disabled the large part of the economy. So yes, they may not have been in Gaza, but they controlled the whole of Gaza, and it was effectively they were acting as an occupying force.
Even controlling the food entering the enclave, and also the sea where the fishermen would fish. They were only allowed to fish within so many kilometers from the land, right, from the shore. They couldn't
Yeah,
go
absolutely.
further
And
deeper waters
you
to
know,
fish.
the control of food, the control of aid going in, of course, now is reached the attention of the world and how much they've blockaded. But of course, they've restricted all of that for well over a decade. You're right. When you're in Gaza before October the 7th, 2023, you can see the Israeli ships far out at sea. The fishermen are not allowed to go out more than, I think, it's 6 kilometers,
Yes.
completely under the control of the Israelis. They control what went in and out. They control the electricity that was available. They control the fuel that was going in. They control the food. The most fertile part of Gaza is the eastern border, which of course is by the border, and they're not allowed to have any buildings there or any farmland at all. So the most fertile, they're kept away from the most fertile ground.
Well, this is a whole chapter just on its own, the isolation and the imprisonment of Gaza. But we unfortunately don't have all that time. We have to focus on the newer part of the history of Gaza. And I want to go back to when when you left Gaza, you and other doctors, you met senior officials in Washington and in London. And excuse me. One of them was Samantha Power, the Pulitzer Prize winning former U.S. ambassador to the UN, to the United Nations, whose public career was built on warning the world about genocide and urging the United States to prevent mass atrocities before they even occur. You presented evidence, you presented testimony, you presented photographs, you presented eyewitness accounts, your own, the most reliable, yet nothing changed. So, what shocked you more, Nick? What you witnessed and lived in Gaza, or the reaction and ultimately the lack of action of the people you briefed afterwards?
I mean, it's all shocked me. The What I've witnessed in Gaza, and I'm sure you heard a lot of that when I was interviewed on the Tucker Carlson show, and we may go into that in detail. I've witnessed the most appalling atrocities, war crimes, clear evidence of genocide, ethnic cleansing. I've seen it with my own eyes. Children being shot, deliberately targeted by Israeli soldiers, appalling things. But I've been utterly appalled, disgusted by the senior politicians I've met who have not acted. You're absolutely right. I've taken to all these senior politicians, I've taken enlarged, coloured, laminated photographs of children with bullets in their head, children missing limbs, children who've been been killed, children with holes in their chest, children who died of malnutrition. I've put those photographs under the noses of Samantha Power in the US, a whole variety of senators in the US, other Biden officials in the Biden government. I've shown it to our Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, the Conservative Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, many other cabinet ministers. They know what's going on, and I have been profoundly disturbed by their lack of action, despite the fact they know what's going on. Some of them were visibly shocked, and to give some credit to Samantha Power, she listened to us. She was clearly shocked. I got the impression that she was, I mean, I'm not making any excuses, but I got this distinct impression that she was being held back by senior members of, but by the president himself. But she was visibly shocked, which is more than I can say for our Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, Sir Keir Starmer, whose reaction was, in my view, unforgivable.
Oh, which was what? What was his reaction?
Well, no reaction at
No.
all. He just said, "Thank you very much."
Oh.
No reaction at all. You can tell by looking at their faces what reactions they give. And some other cabinet ministers were visibly shocked. Wes Streeting was visibly shocked when we told him, when we showed it to him. But our Prime Minister, no reaction at all.
Now, according to reporting by numerous reliable media sources like Reuters, Associated Press, Al Jazeera, the WHO as an organization and other international bodies, more than 73, now I'm saying what they're putting out officially, more than 73,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since October 23. Over 173,000 wounded. Approximately 9,500 remain missing beneath the rubble. More than 1,700 healthcare workers have been killed. Over 200 journalists and media workers have lost their lives. According to the BBC, it's the largest number of deaths in all the wars combined after World War II of the media. And nearly all of Gaza's 36 hospitals have been damaged. Today, only about 17 or 18 remain operational in any capacity. And even those are functioning only partially under severe shortages of staff, medicine, fuel, and equipment. So I want to ask you first, do the figures that they are putting out, and I just quoted, of the deaths, broadly align with your understanding of the scale of the catastrophe? Do you believe the true numbers
underestimate this? They underestimate it dramatically. Those deaths are that official figure you quoted, which has been released by the Ministry of Health in Gaza, agreed with the UN, and indeed agreed with the Israeli army now. They only report people who are killed immediately by the trauma and whose bodies are seen. So it doesn't include people whose bodies are buried under the rubble. It doesn't include people who might die 3 or 4 weeks later from their injuries. The Lancet Medical Journal, which has published brilliantly over the course of the last 3 years, estimates that figure of people directly killed by trauma is almost certainly underestimated by about 50%. So they would estimate that the people killed directly by trauma is over 100,000. These are people killed by explosive injuries or by gunshot wounds. If you take into account excess deaths, that's a term we became very familiar with during the COVID pandemic. These are people who don't die of trauma, but die of cancer that's not being treated, or heart disease that's not being treated, or kidney disease, or strokes, or liver disease, or infectious diseases, or indeed malnutrition. That number of deaths is much higher. There are probably over nearly 400,000 people in Gaza with chronic diseases which have not been treated adequately. So there are some estimates. The Lancet estimated that there's probably over nearly 250,000 of excess deaths. Other organisations have estimated that figure may be over 500,000. We don't know, but we know that at least 10%, if not getting on for 20% of the population of Gaza has been killed by Israel effectively.
And let's remind our viewers that the original population of Gaza before all this started was around 2 million, correct?
Yeah, 2.2 million, and that
Oh,
figure will be well under 2 million now.
yes.
The rest of the figures you gave are largely accurate, I think. There have been nearly 2,000 healthcare workers killed. A very disproportionate amount of healthcare workers killed compared to any other conflict in modern times.
Yeah.
If you're a healthcare worker in Gaza, you are 3 times more likely to be killed than any other civilian. And of course, they're meant to be protected in a war. So there've been, and there's a lot of evidence that they have been deliberately targeted, the healthcare workers. Many have been abducted, illegally detained, tortured, some of them killed, including friends of mine, and of course, many more injured. So yes, there has been a huge amount of evidence of the deliberate targeting of healthcare workers, the deliberate destruction of hospitals. The figures you talked about, the hospitals, yes, the United Nations tells us that roughly 50% of the hospitals are still functioning, partly. But a partly functioning hospital in Gaza may mean very little more than the ability to apply first aid. There's probably just one hospital, only one reasonably big sized hospital is functioning, and that's Nasser Medical Complex. And even that is only partly functioning.
Nick, you mentioned that you've also had colleagues of yours, Palestinians, I assume, for sure, who've gotten arrested and have been tortured in jail, and some have even demised. How many of such colleagues of yours have died in under custody in Israeli prison?
So about 5 or 6 close friends that I know have died, whether it's been killed in their homes, whether it's killed in the hospitals or killed in custody. A significant larger number than that of people I was acquainted with, who I knew but perhaps didn't know well, have been killed. And of course, everyone I know in Gaza, everyone I know has had close relatives or close friends killed.
Yes, of course, it goes without saying when the death toll is so high and it's they're all concentrated in a small area of land. Um, I cannot recall the name of the doctor. Maybe you can, but I remember it was a while ago. He was educated in the UK, brilliant, but he chose to return to Gaza and be a surgeon. He was arrested. I don't know what hospital he was in, but he was severely tortured in terms of sodomized in jail, and he died from his internal injuries. It was brutal from the
So that was
testimonials that are
Dr.
coming out.
Adnan Al-Bursh,
Did you know him personally?
Adnan Al-Bursh, an iconic orthopedic surgeon who I didn't know well. I had met him I was in Gaza in May 2023, just 5 months before the events of October the 7th, and I met him and had coffee with him then. He's the one who was abducted, tortured to death, and increasing amount of evidence suggests that he was sodomized to death.
Yes. Well, let's proceed. These topics will just not end, but I'd like to cover some more ground with you. So for more than the last 2.5 years, Western audiences have repeatedly been told that Gaza's hospitals were functioning as Hamas command centers. You have spent years inside those hospitals teaching, operating, and working alongside Palestinian doctors. So when you hear that claim, how closely does it align with what you personally witnessed during your years working inside Gaza's healthcare system?
So I talk about what I have seen. I can't tell you what's been happening in hospitals when I've not been there, but I can tell you in all my many years of traveling to Gaza and the many trips I've had to Al-Shifa Hospital, to the European Gaza Hospital, to Nasser Medical Complex, the 3 biggest hospitals in Gaza. I know those hospitals very well. I have never seen any evidence at all of any Hamas militants in the hospital. During the last 2.5 years, I've been working in Nasser Medical Complex and Al-Aqsa Hospital in Deir al-Balah. And again, I've seen no evidence of any Hamas militants in the hospitals at all. And I have had unlimited access to every single part of those hospitals. I've never been denied entry to any part.
Okay.
And I've never seen any evidence of it. And none of my colleagues, my international colleagues, and indeed none of my Gazan colleagues have ever seen any evidence of that. Now, I can't speak about the tunnels because I didn't go into the tunnels. So maybe there were Hamas there. I can't speak about the outbuildings 50 meters away from the main clinical areas in the hospitals because I didn't go there. Maybe they were Hamas militants there. But of course, those are not the areas that the Israeli military are attacking. The Israeli military are bombing the clinical areas, claiming there are Hamas militants there. And none of us have seen any evidence whatsoever. And it is very important to note that the Israeli propaganda, which regurgitates these lies repeatedly, and of course our media, which repeats them, and indeed our government, our ministers repeat them, the Israelis have never provided any remotely verifiable or credible evidence. So my response to those accusations are I have seen no evidence at all. I do not believe that is the case. And you know, if they did have evidence, then believe me, the world would have been shown it by now by the Israelis. So I think this is pure propaganda. And what, in a way, I expect the Israelis to come out with that because they use that to justify their attacks on the hospitals. What is inexcusable is the way that this is repeated by our mainstream media, like the BBC, and by our government ministers. I heard them even this last week in government talking about this and saying, government saying or ministers saying that the hospitals are being used as Hamas command centers. No evidence at all.
Loud and clear, Nick. Would you mind also recounting for us how they don't just bomb they deliberately the hospitals, but they also send, I forgot the terminology for it, the drones that are with the four propellers.
The quadcopters.
Quadcopters, yes. It's a tongue tie for me.
That's right. So we saw lots of evidence of lots of gunshot wounds to the quadcopters. We heard drones all the time. You hear them 24 hours a day, all night long. You're hearing the drones, and a lot of them are just surveillance drones, incidentally, just going everywhere. But you hear the quadcopter drones are these they're fixed wing drones which can hover. And they have not only cameras, video cameras, but they have guns attached to them, which are remotely controlled from a distance from presumably in Israel somewhere. And they are flown all over Gaza, and they're flown into buildings, they're flown into hospitals, and they shoot people. One of my friends, who was a male operating theatre nurse in Nasser Medical Complex, I know him well, I know his sister extremely well. He was shot in the operating theatre in Nasser Hospital by a quadcopter drone, which was remotely controlled by an Israeli operative into the hospital on the fourth floor, into the operating theatre, and shot this friend of mine in the chest. He survived, and I was working with him 6 months later, but that was the quadcopter. We saw lots of people killed by quadcopters. In my last trip, I operated on a pregnant woman who was lying in a tent. It's not really a tent, it's in a shelter covered by canvas in Al Moassi, near one of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation food sites. And the quadcopters were just spraying bullets over all the tents, shooting everyone in the tents. And this pregnant woman came in. She was shot in the abdomen. She was 3 months pregnant. I operated on her. She survived. We saved her life, and we saved the baby's life as well. The bullet missed her pregnant womb by about 3 centimeters, but that she could have been killed. So we saw lots of victims of the quadcopter drones, and there's we heard, I don't know how true this is, but we heard that a lot of them were being controlled by artificial intelligence and seeking targets selected by artificial intelligence.
Well, even if so, it's inexcusable because who feeds the commands of the for the algorithm of the artificial intelligence? So
Absolutely.
There's no excuse on that, no excuse. And to shoot at a doctor while he's in the surgical theater, it means he was performing surgery. And he was shot
He
at,
was
right?
preparing the theatre for theatre. There was not a patient at the time, but he was getting the theatre ready. They were about to bring a patient in. I mean, it's shocking. It is, and there are many stories. I talk about what I have seen and what very, very close friends have experienced. Other doctors I know have seen children being shot in the head by quadcopter drones. Awful injuries.
Well, I want to stay on that for just a little bit more. Just 6 days ago, I ran into a post by someone who uploaded the video of two young Australian female doctors. I don't know if you've seen it. I shared the link with you yesterday.
Yeah,
Had
I
you
have.
seen it already?
Yeah, I'd seen it already. Yeah,
Okay, so they were speaking from inside Gaza. They were, I think, outside Al-Shifa, right? They were
Al-Shifa.
outside Al-Shifa hospital, describing conditions that frankly sound impossible in the 21st century. What's perhaps most striking is that they are describing this reality while a ceasefire has officially been in place since October 25. Yet, despite the ceasefire, they say Gaza's hospital remain unable to recover because essential medicines, equipment, and supplies and other necessities are still not reaching the healthcare system in the quantities required, even though these were stipulations in the ceasefire that once the ceasefire comes into effect, these things are considered number one priority and they're going to be allowed to pass in. So I wanted to ask you what do you have to say about this? We are in a ceasefire since October 25, yet nothing is allowed to pass through. And at what point does the phrase healthcare collapse stop being an adequate description of a humanitarian catastrophe that continues to unfold in Gaza despite a ceasefire being in place?
I mean, they're right. There is no ceasefire. There has been a reduction in the amount of attacks, but there has been over 2,000 violations of the ceasefire agreement by the Israeli military since October. There have been, I'm maybe 2 or 3 weeks out of date with my figures, but I think there's been well over 1,000 Gazans have been killed by Israeli attacks, including several hundred children have been killed. They were obliged under the ceasefire agreement to allow unlimited aid in, and nothing like enough aid has been going in. When I was last in Gaza, there'd been no aid going in for months. So there has been an improvement on that, but it is still nothing like enough. The famine, the severe malnutrition, the deaths from starvation that I witnessed many, many examples of is still persisting. But the world believes there's a ceasefire because they've been told there's a ceasefire by the Israelis, by the Americans, by our government. There is no ceasefire. Let us be very, very clear. The Israelis are still attacking Gaza every single day.
Yes, they describe a daily situation where the basic necessities that a doctor, a surgeon needs are inexistent. They have no soap, no gloves, no clean water, no functioning suction equipment, no reliable electricity, no internet. Doctors spend 20 minutes searching for a simple pair of scissors while patients wait and bombs continue to fall. They describe operations that should take an hour to perform, stretching for hours and hours. And they describe their colleagues, the Palestinian doctors. They said they were working that day. They were up from 6 a.m, and when they had just gotten off work, and it was 8 p.m, and they were saying that we have it good. You know, our colleagues, the Palestinian doctors, are themselves starving. They're exhausted. They're displaced. They're uncertain where their own families are and if they're gonna, live. But their colleagues are working 48-hour shifts at minimum because they are also so understaffed because of colleagues either having to be displaced, or colleagues being arrested, or colleagues who have died. How are your Palestinian colleagues coping under such conditions and pulling all these hours of nonstop work while they themselves are exhausted and they are not eating well?
Yeah, no, well, you're absolutely right. They're malnourished as well. One of my
Malnourished.
good friends, when I was last there, I hardly recognized him. He'd lost 40 kilograms in weight. Yeah, I mean, they are physically ill, they're tired, they're malnourished, they're mentally very damaged. All of us who've been in Gaza have been traumatized by our experiences there, but we spend 4 weeks there. My last trip there, I came out physically and mentally a wreck. Um, but I'm in there for 4 weeks. These people have been in there for 2.5, nearly 3 years. So it is quite remarkable how they have coped. And we talk all the time about the atrocities we've seen there, the terrible, evil things we've seen the Israelis carry out. We don't talk enough about the wonderful examples of humanity that we see in the Palestinian healthcare workers, the inspirational people who are working, as you've described, as those young Australian doctors describe, working the most remarkable amount of hours. And I'm continually, utterly inspired by these people. I think they are the very, very best of humanity. It's what keeps me going back to Gaza for many, many years as the beautiful people there. And they are showing that so much at the moment. They are a truly remarkable people. And I think that they keep going despite the appearances of the whole world being against them.
That's beautifully said. I'm gonna add that they mentioned something that shocked me, a personal circumstance that they had to face. They had to deliver a baby by cesarean section from the headless body of a 9-month pregnant woman who had just been killed, and that just to me was. I'm sure that there are cases that still haunt you today, and it's very, very hard to put this into context and to rationalize it.
We've all seen things that we will just never ever get out from our minds, particularly some of the children who I operated on and who died of malnutrition. Cases which haunt me, cases which still make me cry when I think about them, when I talk about them. And I could spend an hour telling about them with their names. I've got pictures of them. Just appalling. And I think we've all got examples like that of the most devastating, desperately sad cases.
Um, you had mentioned earlier that you know, people in Gaza are dying, the excess deaths, because medicine fails them. There's a lack of proper medical supplies or treatments, like cancer patients, but also because there's a lack of food, there's no clean water. Basic necessities have become impossible to obtain. But there's also another hidden death toll. Before the war, many critically ill Palestinians already depended on permits to leave Gaza for specialist treatment. Now, after October 23, I'd like you to tell us, is this still happening but at a much lower pace, or is it not happening at all? Because we hear reports of patients dying while waiting for medical evacuations, or children surviving surgery only to succumb to starvation.
Yes. I mean, I'll talk very briefly about what it was like before October the 7th, because they've never been able to treat everything in Gaza. So patients have always had to be evacuated or medically transferred from Gaza to other places for treatment, usually the West Bank, sometimes Jordan, sometimes Egypt, and sometimes even into Israel for treatment. So, for example, I mean, I'm a cancer surgeon. They've never had radiotherapy machines, linear accelerators in Gaza ever. So anyone needing radiotherapy would have to be transferred out. They could do surgery, some surgery, they could do chemotherapy, but they've never been able to give radiotherapy in Gaza. So if you needed radiotherapy, you'd have to be transferred out. Now, and for many other life-saving treatments, they couldn't do there. So an application would be put forward from the Ministry of Health to the Israeli authorities to move them out to get treatment abroad. The average time it took for those applications to go through was about 3 months.
Oh,
and about 35–40% of them were denied. So only 60% were given permission to go. So those people who were denied were effectively being sentenced to death because this was life-saving treatment. And if they were given permission to go, 2/3 of them were sent out alone without any family at all. So little children who might be sent to East Jerusalem, for example, for radiotherapy for their brain tumor, might be sent alone with no parent accompanying them. So there was a barbaric system in place at the time. Yes, they did take some patients into Israel, but most people did not get adequate treatment at all. Now, of course, it for the large part of this war, there was virtually no patients being transferred out. There are some patients being transferred out now. Quite a few have gone to Qatar. I understand some have gone into Israel. My own country in the UK, I think, has taken the grand number of 50 patients,
Oh,
which again makes me embarrassed that our country has been so awful. But there are about 25,000 patients who are needing urgent treatment that cannot be carried out in Gaza, who are waiting to be medically evacuated. We know that probably about 1,500 have died so far whilst waiting to be evacuated. So there is a large number coming out. And those patients who are all critically ill, some of them with terrible infections, are also malnourished because there's not enough food for them. So I saw many, many people die of a lack of nutrition. Patients who would have survived their injuries, who would have survived their surgery, but who had no nutritional support, so died of malnutrition. And of course, they not only came in malnourished, but also in the hospital, we had no nutrition to give them. So we literally had no nutrition to give them. So the only way they could get nutrition was if their family could find some food for them. But if there were patients who couldn't eat, who relied upon liquid feed into their stomach or intravenous feeding, we had none of that. None of it at all. So many of these people died. Patients of mine who I'd operated on died, children died because of lack of nutrition.
the young female doctors whose video got circulated 6 days ago, they mentioned, now I remember, something that also shocked me. They said that they were not allowed to bring in with them in Gaza food, even small amounts for them, and money. Is that true? Is that something that you also face?
Yeah.
And can you just tell us the reasoning behind that? Why no money so that you don't give around to Palestinians so that they maybe can buy some food? And why no food so you don't
So
give it around?
when Rafah was open until May the 6th, 2024, we could take a lot of stuff in through Egypt. So we went in before May 24. I had 2 trips. We went in through Egypt, through Rafah, and we could take lots of stuff in. On May the 6th, the Israelis invaded Rafah, destroyed the crossing, and closed it. So all the trips since then have had to go in through Israel. And you're right, those Australian doctors are right. We are told, all the aid organizations that take emergency teams in are told that doctors, nurses, we can take nothing except what is for our own personal use. So if they think you've got more food than you need, they will take it away. You're allowed a maximum of, I think it's $300 we're allowed to take in, whereas before we could take lots of money in. No surgical equipment, no medical equipment. One group of American doctors who joined me and my team when I was out there last summer brought in cartons of formula feed
Yeah,
because they knew there was a
a short.
complete absence of formula feed in Nasser hospital. That was all, every single container was removed by the Israeli soldiers at the border crossing, every single container. Now, you ask why are they doing that? We can only speculate, can't we? But
Yeah.
they don't want you to take anything in to help the Gazans because this is part of their core policy of ethnically cleansing the country. their whole policy has been around disabling the whole infrastructure of living in Gaza. That is why they have deliberately targeted the healthcare system. I think the targeting of the healthcare system and the healthcare workers has been a central core of their ethnic cleansing policy, their destruction of the agricultural system. So they want to stop us taking anything in that can help the patients there. So the deprivation of food, the refusal to allow formula feed to go in, it's unfathomable, but it is happening, and they are starving. Their policy of deliberate starvation is being used to kill the population of Gaza.
And as a side note, when's the last time you were in Gaza?
Last summer, last July. So I've been trying to go back for the last few months. I'm hoping to go. I mean, a lot of us have not been able to get in recently. 36 NGOs have been banned. The NGO I've been going in with for many years, Medical Aid for Palestinians, has been banned completely now. Médecins Sans Frontières has been banned completely. So I'm hoping to go in with another organization, but people who have spoken out are mostly being denied entry by the Israelis. But I will keep trying.
Yes, that's commendable. That's commendable on you. I want us to shift to another part now of this whole issue. It's the prison system. Now, according to the Israeli Prison Service figures, roughly 9,500 Palestinians are currently being held in Israeli prisons and detention facilities. They say that the children number is around 350. I don't know if that's true. I think it would be more, but this is it. I'm quoting official numbers on their part. So thousands are being held under administrative detention without charge, though, or trial, adults and youngsters. So Israel is the only country in the world that systematically prosecutes large numbers of Palestinian children through military courts, with hundreds of minors passing through that system every year. When a child experiences detention, interrogation, isolation, uncertainty, repeated exposure to violence, and allegations, I will say the word allegations, of sexual abuse during the very years their brain and personality are still developing, what does that do to them, Nick, psychologically?
Well, it'll be profoundly damaging. These kids have got developing brains. The psychological trauma, the malnutrition, the lack of nutrition, the illnesses, this will all impair brain development. So they will have lifelong, permanent consequences. You quite rightly talk about the psychological trauma. That is, it's unimaginable, the size of that problem in Gaza at the moment. They will all have undergone huge psychological damage, and virtually none of that can be treated at the moment. A close friend of mine is a child psychotherapist in Gaza City. He was imprisoned for 3 months. He's out and tortured. He's out now. All their buildings have been destroyed, but he is still every single day with his team trying to treat the children who've got psychological damage. So yes, it's a particular problem in children because their brains will be permanently affected by that.
And also, the children who are detained and in prison, are they even salvageable after all these years? I mean, I don't know if you've heard of the case of Ahmad Manasra. Have you heard of him?
No, I haven't.
Very sad case. So Ahmad was, would you like me to recount it to you?
Yeah, please do.
So Ahmed Manasra, he was an autistic Palestinian child when he entered the detention system. Human rights groups say he was interrogated without a lawyer present while suffering from a concussion and skull fracture, despite reportedly not fully understanding what was happening around him. He was severely autistic, or what was being said during the interrogation. He was all alone, no parents, no lawyer assigned. Video of his interrogation. I have the clip. I'll send to you. It's gone up online.
Please do.
which drew international attention, appeared to show an interrogator striking him on the head while he was still suffering from those injuries. So during his years in detention, Nick, he spent more than a decade in solitary confinement, roughly half his life, which is illegal under international law to spend so much time in solitary confinement. A child, an autistic child, and later developed severe psychiatric problems, including schizophrenia and memory loss, drawing concern from psychiatrists, UN experts. They've dealt with that case as a UN, and human rights organizations. So it's not just the children in Gaza who have lost their family, who have suffered trauma, who have suffered injuries, who have lost limbs. There's also the children who have been arrested. Most of them are from the West Bank, are in prisons, in detention centers, undergoing daily abuse and torture and alleged sexual attacks and isolation, confinement. And what's this? What about them also, The same question.
I agree. I mean, it's, we talk about Gaza, but of course there's appalling human rights abuses going on in the West Bank the whole time, and of course in Lebanon as well now. I don't know the details of that story, and I don't have any particular information about the West Bank other than that which is publicly available, but it is entirely believable to me because I've personally interviewed and taken testimonies from people who've been imprisoned from Gaza in Israeli prisons who've been tortured. I've taken very detailed testimonies. I've taken photographs of their wounds. They've described to me the intimate details of their tortures, which are just beyond, I want to say beyond belief. They're not beyond belief. I believe every bit of it now, but I would not have imagined that any human being could treat other humans like this. And what you've just described, I'm afraid, is all too believable now.
Then there are some very good Israelis within Israel. There's lawyers who are trying to help these people. One of them, his name is Ben Marmarelli. He recently made the shocking allegation. He said, I don't know if you've heard it, he said that his Palestinian prisoner clients that he represents have begged him not to visit them to prepare for their court cases because according to them, that's what I need to say, they are, I don't want to say the R word, every time authorities learn that their lawyer is coming to see them. So if that's true, then that means that prisoners are effectively being punished for trying to exercise one of the most basic legal rights available to them as human beings. If prisoners generally fear seeing their own lawyer, what does that mean for due process, for the ability to prepare a legal defense, and ultimately for the credibility of the entire detention system?
I know. I mean, it's so distressing, those stories, so distressing.
There are photographs of detainees when they're being released to their families. Many of them, you see them, you said that you've interrogated and you've taken photographs. So many of them are visibly emaciated, psychologically broken. And I've seen in most of them, they carry this hollow look in their eyes after all these years of alleged abuse and isolation and torture. Have you seen that in real life? This hollow stare in their eyes.
Oh yes. So one of the young men that I interviewed, he'd only just been released, and he was exactly like that. He is almost like he was in a bit of a daze, just staring into space, and he'd gone through the most appalling torture, just appalling torture. I did see him a year later. I spent a lot of time with him when I was last there, and he had recovered a lot, but still had terrible nightmares. The other thing, of course, is you see that look you described in the children in the hospitals, those that survived, children with appalling injuries, they have these sort of vacant looks in their faces. They don't talk, they just stare into space, and they clearly have been devastatingly damaged psychologically and will require so much help to get them back to normal living.
Yeah, and there've been the most recent allegations that have gained wider attention have happened slightly over a month ago when the New York Times on May 11th published Nicholas Christoph's article. I don't know if you've read it. I'm sure you
Yeah,
have.
I have.
What
Yeah.
do you have to say about that? You know, he discussed testimonies from Palestinian detainees alleging the R word and sexual torture and the use of objects during such assaults,
Yeah. What is what I've heard.
and
So
dogs being used for such
it
assaults.
corroborated it. I mean, I didn't hear any stories of dogs being used in that way, but I did hear very clear stories of dogs being used as weapons. The two young men I interviewed, both when they were being tortured, they were blindfolded. They had dogs set on them repeatedly. I didn't hear any stories of sexual abuse by the dogs. I also heard stories of dogs being used with cameras and guns mounted on their backs, and they were trained to go into hospitals. They had people controlling the guns, and people being shot. The dogs were being trained to go in. So yes, I didn't hear any stories about dogs being used in sexual abuse, but I read that article and it was very distressing.
Yes, and it was an article that raised a lot of eyebrows and a lot of reactions coming in
Absolutely.
from Israel and from the prime minister there, threatening lawsuits and stuff against the journalist who wrote it, who is a reputed New York Times journalist. It's not us saying it. And it's up there for people to read. Let's shift to the most recent passage of legislation by the Knesset permitting the execution of prisoners convicted of terrorism offenses. To be hanged. And then footage is circulated widely on the internet of the lawmakers celebrating this passage by handing out drinks in the halls of the Knesset. And then you have its strongest proponents, National Security Minister Ben Gvir, just days later, sharing photographs were shared from his birthday celebration that depicted his birthday cake being shaped in the form of a noose. As a physician who has spent years working with Palestinians, I see you nodding your head, so you know what I'm talking about, right? So
I do.
working with Palestinians and witnessing the consequences of this conflict, what goes through your mind when you hear of the passage of such a law, and when you see the lawmakers celebrating its passage, and then you see a minister of government blowing out the candles to his cake shaped in the form of a noose?
Do you know, to be honest, I'm not surprised. I wasn't surprised by any of that because I've, as you would have done, seen so many statements from Ben Gvir and Smotrich and Netanyahu and the others over the last 2 or 3 years. How anyone can honestly say there is no evidence of genocidal intent when we hear what these statements repeatedly come out with is quite beyond me. And I think I'm used to anything coming from those individuals. I mean, the imposition of the death penalty just on the Palestinians is as stark an example of the apartheid system they have out there as anything could be, and it's utterly abhorrent and barbaric. But I'm not surprised, and that's how we all feel really at the impact of what Israel has been doing.
Nick, as you know, I'm also half Lebanese, not just Cypriot, and I come from neighboring Lebanon. I might be residing in Cyprus, but I also travel to Lebanon often. And many people there feel that their suffering has become invisible because the world's attention is focused elsewhere. And I'm not saying it's focused on Gaza. Gaza is completely shoved in the background. It's focused on Iran. And so, according to Reuters and the World Health Organization, Al Jazeera, Lebanon's Ministry of Health, currently more than 4,000 Lebanese have been killed and nearly 12,000 wounded between March the 2nd and June of this year alone. More than 130 healthcare workers have lost their lives in this time period. Over 400 healthcare workers have been injured. 203 attacks on healthcare facilities recorded by the WHO. At least 17 hospitals damaged. 44 primary healthcare centers forced to close. More than 160 ambulances and healthcare vehicles struck, and journalists covering the conflict also killed in large numbers. We're witnessing centuries-old villages, some tracing their history back to the time of Christ, leveled to the ground. As we speak now, Nick, approximately 60 villages have been so extensively destroyed. They've been leveled, that they've been gazified. They're no longer found on the map. They've effectively been wiped off the map. So, as a physician who has spent years witnessing the human consequences of war firsthand, what's your reaction when you hear these figures coming out of Lebanon?
Well, I'm horrified, of course, but I'm seeing they're doing what they've done in Gaza, they're now doing in Lebanon, and I'm seeing exactly the same things, albeit in smaller numbers, but the same targeting of healthcare workers, the same targeting of doctors, and and the world's media, the governments of the Western world are again allowing this to happen. They're not reporting it accurately. They're not speaking out. They're not trying to stop the Israeli government doing what they're doing. So we're seeing the same all over again, and it's just deeply shocking. But again, probably not surprising, because Israel has been allowed to behave like this with impunity for many, many, many years.
So, ending, it's a question that I thought of, and I wanted to ask you. 100 years from now, when historians write about this period, what do you think the future generations will find hardest to believe? What happened to the Palestinians and to the people of South Lebanon right now is happening, or that unlike every generation before us, nobody will be able to say this time, we didn't know?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that, I mean, people will look back and recognize beyond any doubt this was a genocide that has taken place. And of course, the Israeli psychopaths who run their government, who have conducted this genocide, will be, hopefully, rightly will have been held to account for this. But I think people will look back and they will look with absolute incredulity that many of our Western governments allowed this to happen, and they will be found out. They will be held to account, and people will look back in history and say, the UK government, the US government, other governments were complicit in this. And that may well end up being the most shocking thing at all, that Israel were allowed to do this and the rest of the world did not stop them.
Well, Nick, Dr. Maynard, thank you for your time. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for insisting on trying to put the truth out there, and for not giving up on going back and helping the people of Gaza. And thank you for sharing your firsthand experiences with us here today. As we close, is there one final thought you'd like to leave our viewers with? Something you believe people should understand about Gaza, about South Lebanon, or this moment in history that perhaps we haven't touched on today?
Well, I'm going to go back to the people. I think that this is something that Tucker Carlson brought out in my interview when I was telling him how beautiful the people were. He said, the American people won't believe that because they've been brought up for decades to believe that the Palestinians are all animals, are all hell-bent on destroying Israel. The Palestinian people, and I want to leave on this note, are the most beautiful people I have known in my life. They are kind, they're empathetic, they're generous, they're resilient, they're resourceful. They are a profoundly beautiful people who have been terribly, terribly wronged for many, many years. And this situation, people often say, well, it's very complicated out there. It's not complicated. It is a simple matter of what is right and wrong, and what is being done to the Gazans, what is being done to the Palestinians, what is being done to the Lebanese is profoundly wrong. And anyone with any humanity should stand up and call out this behavior and speak up for the Gazans and the Palestinians.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Maynard. So if you found value in this conversation today with Dr. Nick Maynard, please take a moment to like, to comment. Very importantly, subscribe and press the notification bell so you do receive notifications of our new drops, and share this interview with friends and family. Every share helps this independent voice from the Eastern Mediterranean push through the headwinds and reach more people across the English-speaking world. Thank you for joining us today.